the 15th of July, 2025, approximately 3:45 p.m. Book 5, The War Against Death, Chapter 1, The Shadow That Wasn't Killed. It was not night, but the trees whispered as if it were. Cynidia's borderlands had always been dense, but now the fog came in layers. Sheets of it curled around the base of chaired pines, rising in slow, deliberate folds, as if the ground were exhaling. The silence was total. No bird calls, no insects, not even the distant clatter of carts on high road. Just the wind, and beneath it, a sound that wasn't one. A pressure in the ear that suggested a voice too old to use language. Vakhar, a colonial scout, squinted through the gray. His horse refused to move. Smart beast. He stepped down, boots crunching over dead leaves and Ephelum slag. The Empire had burned Illyria clean, but it hadn't been taken to full. Things still grew there, not the kind you could name. Vinework twisted in geometries that defied the path of the sun. Shrubs bore seed pods with tiny serrated openings. Even the mosses clung to stones like forgotten hands. There was a shape in the mist, tall and not quite still. It shimmered like heat mirage, but the air was cold enough to see his own breath. He raised his voice. "State your name and office." No response. He reached for his blade. Before he could draw it, a whisper slithered behind his ear. Not in any tongue he knew, but one he felt. And then a single eye opened in the fog. Not in a face, just an eye, floating, lidless, ancient. Vecker stumbled back, but the mist shifted with him. Shapes emerged, tall and jointless, moving in a rhythm like breath held too long. The pines around him began to warp, bark splitting into strange spiral knots that bled a faint glow. He ran, but there was no path. The trees were wrong. The slope reversed itself. His footprints vanished behind him like ink erased from parchment. The fog thickened, not passively, but with intention. He shouted once, just once, and when he turned to scream, the fog exhaled. He was gone. And the thing behind the eye exhaled again, softly, not a roar, not a cry. A sigh, as if it had just awakened and remembered it had once been hurt. Then the mist withdrew slightly, just enough to reveal the hollow where he had stood. The leaves did not rustle, the trees did not creak, but in the silence the moss across the roots pulsed once like breath held and released. Far above, where no branch reached, something began to turn in the sky. Not a star, a hole shaped like remembering. The standards did not flutter. They were not cloth. Each was a rigid white panel reinforced with Ephelum bands, bordered in deep Priimydian red, centered on every surface. 12 matte black squares arranged in a perfect 3x4 grid, not painted, pressed. The seal of empire was not meant to be flown, it was meant to be obeyed. In the castle plaza, 1,000 feet moved as one, sandaled, polished, synchronized by pressure-coated cobblestones beneath their heels. Every seventh stone released a soft chime when properly struck. A calibration feature designed by Heron, who we'll come to know more of himself. The crowd did not cheer, they held posture, soldiers square, chin raised, hands at rest, no expressions, only alignment. Heron stood at the front, not on horseback. He occupied a civic glider chariot drawn by 4 black horses with silver tack. The cabin was glass-paneled, ceremonial, meant for viewing. Behind him, 12 upright flag standards followed, each one bearing the black square grid of the 12. No color, no text. The 12 watched from above. A balcony of polished basalt overhung the plaza, their silhouettes indistinct but present. They did not wave, they did not move. To the west, near the edge of the square, a girl dropped her slate and clattered against the stone, disrupting the pressure sequence. The chime failed. 4 stewards stepped forward immediately. Flanking her on either side, she bowed, they nodded. She was escorted from the square. Order resumed. Above, the sky was clear. The sun hung at its proper angle. There was no wind from within the glider. Heron watched it all. His face, visible through the glass, bore no emblem. He wore no crown, only the black mantle of civic design, collarless, beltless, seamless. He did not wave. He did not look at the people. He looked at the tiles, watched their rhythm, counted missteps. His breath left a faint fog on the pane. It cooled instantly, then vanished. Somewhere behind him, a civic band played. Their tune was steady, structured, music designed not to entertain but to maintain pace. As the glider passed into shadow, a courier rode up beside the cabin, mounted on a light gray horse. He passed Heron, a sealed scroll through the window slit. Heron broke the seal, unrolled the parchment. Troops report irregular fog formation along the Cnidian interior. Visual contact lost with forward scouts. Silence observed for 42 hours. Heron blinked once, then twice. He rolled the scroll back, placed it in the cabinet beneath his seat. He looked up, not at the people, but at the horizon. Then he said evenly, "Noted." The door sealed with a whisper. No lock, no hinges, just pressure, measured exactly. Heron pressed his palm flat to the obsidian plate and waited. The chamber recognized weight, warmth, tempo, not identity, but rhythm. Inside, the air was cold. His quarters were rectangular, windowless, stone walls polished. Glass shelving on all sides, scroll tubes stacked in numerical order, unlabeled but memorized. No tapestries, no books, no bed. A single chair of copper-trimmed hardwood stood beneath the central light well. The desk beside it bore only one subject, a slate of gray-white parchment and a compass stylus. Heron removed his mantle, folded it once, placed it in the recessed drawer under the floor. He then sat. No sounds carried in. Even the pipes ran silent, a feature he had requested personally. He drew a circle, then another inside it, then 3 lines bisecting both. He paused. He added no notation, just watched the ink settle, thin, black, non-reflective. He turned the parchment and repeated the circle. This time, he shaded the inner ring, then stopped. He reached for the side drawer, opened it, and removed a single folded diagram, well-worn, handled often. Unfolding it revealed a lattice of valves and pressure rails marked in layered ink. Near the center, the word "Ephelum?" Underlined twice. He touched the page. There was no magic in it, no spark, no hum, just theory, lines, pressure, potential. He leaned back in the chair. The light overhead dimmed slightly as clouds passed, natural ones this time, unscheduled, noted. He stared upward, the edges of expression unreadable, not neutral, just buffered. Eventually, he folded the diagram again, slower than before. Replaced it. Took up the blank parchment once more. He began again. Circle, ring, cross, line. This time, he did not stop. The hills were green, but the grass didn't move. No wind, no bird song, just the slow creak of leather straps as Sigil, who had once been known as Priimydica, adjusted the pack across his shoulders. He stood on the rise for a long time before descending, watching the tree. It stood alone in the field, tall, black-barked, crowned in a canopy of leaves that never browned, even in frost. The tree. Not a symbol, not a legend, not planted. It had ungrown itself from Priimydica years ago, withdrawn, vanished, and regrown here, not as defiance, as necessity. Only Sigil, that's what the locals called him, knew how it hated being moved, or rather, how much it hated needing to move. He approached slowly. The roots stretched wider now. He measured the distance between them as he walked. 3 steps farther than last season, 6 since the war. The bark had cracked along one of the lower ridges, not chipped, cracked, as if something inside had pushed outward. He knelt, placed his hand on the trunk. It was warm, not sunlight warm, wound warm. He examined slowly, he exhaled slowly, and stood. Not yet, he said aloud, to the tree or to himself. He walked the circle, checking the perimeter stones. 3 were out of alignment, 1 was missing entirely. Pulled inward by the roots, not kicked loose by weather. At the eastern post he found what he was looking for, a patch of moss that had not grown in straight lines. It twisted slightly, as if leaning away from something unseen. He crouched, pressed 2 fingers in the dirt. Still dry, still dense, but different. He stood again and looked to the northern sky. No clouds, no smoke, and yet the wind did not come. Sigil touched the pendant beneath his tunic, the old symbol half removed, half burned. Once it had been the sigil of Priimydica. Now it was only heat-stained copper. He turned back toward the hills. Soon, he said. This time not as hope, as fact. The tree behind him shed a single leaf. It didn't fall. It curled in midair and turned towards the west. The light had dimmed, but Heron had not. He sat at the same desk, same chair, same 3 concentric circles drawn in ink and halved by a line that broke the center. He had not moved in over an hour. The diagram before him was precise, exact to his own standards, but wrong. The flow would not hold. Not for pressure, not for heat. The line marked Epsilon, ? Now sat beside a list of cross failures. The ratios were consistent, but the sequence never stabilized. He placed his writing utensil down. No frustration showed. He simply stood and stepped back from the desk. He crossed the chamber once, turned, crossed again, then again. 4 times he stopped by the east wall, where a narrow slit of reinforced glass faced the courtyard towers. The view was always the same, lights in pattern, shadows beneath, no sound, but tonight it was a mark. It sat just off center, a faint smudge, half a thumbprint pressed from the inside. Heron leaned close, studied the curvature. It was not his, too small, too wide. He reached for a cloth, wiped once. It didn't vanish. He wiped again, no change. Eventually, he stepped back. Not alarmed, not puzzled, just aware. He turned, walked to the desk, and sat once more, but this time he did not pick up the stylus. He looked at the page, then at the wall, then at the page again. His hand moved to draw, then stopped, then drew the circle again, slightly smaller, slightly closer to the center, no line. Then he pressed his thumb into the paper gently. A mark remained. He did not write beneath it. He simply turned the parchment over, folded it once, and placed it aside. He sat still until the light overhead went out. Then, and only then, did he sleep. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2. Heron and the machine that failed Grace. The ratios held. Heron examined the page once more, adjusting the arc of the containment line by half a degree. The coil geometry responded in silence. No pressure escape, no delay, no flame. He marked it with a dot of ink just left of center. The core chamber stood before him, empty, clean, domed in brass. The liquid compound, dark as cold glass, swirled inside its base tank. Black powder dissolved under precise heat, not ignited but compressed into force. It worked. As he would later find out, that was the problem. Heron moved to the central console. His steady hands moved to the many mechanical knobs and valves of the project before him. He adjusted the intake gate, recording the delay time against his mental model. No creak, no hiss. The machine breathed inward and returned stillness. He stepped back. The room was white stone and square, high-walled, unadorned, 1 long table, 3 lanterns, 10 scrolls, each unrolled halfway. He had been working for 16 hours, and still he felt no fatigue, only clarity. There was a knock at the door, measured, deliberate. He did not turn. Another knock. Then Heron, hereward, by civic decree of the High Council, you are summoned. A pause. Consular chamber, now. He exhaled, slow. Closed the intake valve, tightened the line. He took off his gloves and set them beside the scrolls. One last look at the machine. No glow, no sound, no scent. Still. He stepped into the corridor, the door sealed behind him with a whisper. At the far end of the marble hall stood Critias, clad in his domestic mantle, black with steel-gray filigree. He did not smile, but his voice was warm. Heron, he said, nodding. They finally caught up to you. Heron did not reply. Critias extended a scroll. By decree of the Unified 12, Heron hereward is named Council of Foreign Affairs, effective this hour. You've earned this, Critias said, turning. The question is, what will you do with it? They walked in silence toward the civic core. The chamber is colder than Heron expected. 12 seats carved from stone, so dark it reflected nothing, circled the lower platform. Each seat bore a sigil, not a name. The room smelled of paper and lye. No torches, just overhead skylight, cloud filtered pale gray on gray. Heron stood in the center. To his right, the engine, contained, ready. One of the 12 leaned forward, a gesture. Begin. Heron unrolled the scroll in his hand. This unit functions by compression and rotational balance. The fuel is a derivative compound, a liquefied extract of black powder cooled into stillness before motion. There is no fire, there is no excess. He stepped back, placed a gloved hand on the side lever. The engine responded without sound. Gears did not click, valves did not hiss. The core spun, then stopped, then spun again. Nothing burned, nothing radiated. One of the 12 shifted. Heron spoke without lifting his voice. This machine returns motion without combustion. It reclaims force from pressure and reuses it. It produces equilibrium. There was silence, then one of the 12 raised a hand, another gesture. Submit. Heron stopped the machine, stepped away. The 12 conferred through motion. One hand, two, a tilt, a closed fist. The vote was not audible, but final. Another elder spoke, voice thin, ceremonial. The project is to be suspended, the device is to be sealed, no replication authorized. Critias stood by the wall. He did not move. Heron bowed once, turned, walked away. No one stopped him. The doors closed behind him. Heron walked in silence, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by the stone. The corridor stretched long and dim, flanked by 27 pillars, each engraved with a civic virtue, discipline, balance, submission, clarity, endurance. He passed them without looking. The walls held no torchlight, just the dull shimmer of inlaid marble dust beneath the floor, pulsing faintly with the rhythm of foot traffic, a design Heron had helped calibrate once. Ahead, a voice. Impressive silence, said Critias. He stood at the end of the hall, hands clasped behind his back. His mantle of domestic affairs was uncreased. The seal of the Guild of Righteousness glinted faintly at his collarbone, his face unreadable. They didn't understand it, Critias continued, stepping forward. Or worse, they did. Heron didn't stop walking. Critias matched his pace, footsteps deliberately misaligned by half a beat. You remember Su2025? Critias asked. You lifted that gate, 40 men couldn't move it, and you lifted it. No response. The dock at Priimydica, you caught a failing rig line with one arm and your teeth. They sing about that now. The rope sang, the rope held. That's how they tell it. Still silence. You led the civic reassertion through 5 city sectors. No formation broke, no units scattered. You've done everything they could ask, without asking. They turned a corner. The corridor narrowed. The air cooled slightly. Here, the walls bore etched patterns, coded numerals marking the floor divisions for the inner civic core. Heron's eyes flicked once to a spiral glyph, then back to the stone ahead. Critias looked straight ahead, voice lower now. They don't fear the machine. They fear it worked. Heron stopped beside a vaulted doorway. So did Critias. I could have kept it private, Heron said. I chose not to. I know, said Critias. That's why I've had a second one built exactly with that in mind. A pause. Then, we give them a second showing. Controlled, direct, no documents, no attendance. Heron's brow moved just slightly. Critias met his glance. Only the 12, he said. They need to see what stillness means up close. Then, with a glance toward the corridor ceiling, there's a new line in the legal syntax these days, snuck in through procedural renewal. If some accident were to befall the 12, the one forbid. He raised his eyebrows. The consuls would have to assume power. Temporarily, of course, until a new 12 could be chosen. Critias chuckled softly. Silly thing, really. As if the 12 would ever find themselves all in one place for such an unfortunate accident. Heron turned, the hem of his mantle brushing against the stone. He walked forward without comment. Critias remained behind, one hand resting on a pillar engraved with restraint. His fingers traced it once, then stopped. He smiled, but only once as he walked away in a deliberate, expressionless manner. The city was silent. No bells, no civic calls, no shifting of the tower events. Inside the vault, Heron moved without sound. The chamber had been cleared, benches removed, scrolls sealed. Only the machine remained, centered on the platform, braced with 4 steel anchors. The core tank pulsed faintly with dark fluid. Heron circled it once, checked the seals, measured the intake delay by touch, reset the ignition sequence backward. 12 seats surrounded the demonstration floor, high-backed, unadorned, perfectly equidistant. He adjusted one of them by less than a palm's width, then stepped back and looked again, satisfied. He removed his mantle, folded it, set it on the northern ledge. From a recessed cabinet beneath the floor, he drew forth a shield. It didn't shine, it didn't gleam. It was called the Defense of Heroes, forged of Ephelum, rough-edged from the siege of Eluria, scored from the civic reassertion. It was rectangular, slightly curved, with a reinforced spine and no emblem. It weighed as much as 10 anvils, and Heron carried it like a thought. The grip on the back was molded to his forearm alone, left side only. Etched above the waistline, above the wrist line, you are the line. He tested the balance, set it upright against the far column, measured the distance again from platform to wall, 12 steps, 10 if rushed. He ran them once in silence, then again, slower. He stood for a long time after that, watching the engine. It made no sound, no heat, no smoke, only the hum of tension held too long. At last, Heron crossed the floor, took up the shield, leaned it beside him, and waited in the dark. The 12 would arrive at first light. They entered without speaking. 12 elders robed in white and gray took their seats around the platform. Each moved with the same deliberate rhythm. Their faces were hidden beneath translucent veils, the ceremonial kind worn only during moments of total judgment. None looked at Heron. The engine stood at the center, idle, still. Its casing gleamed faintly with pressure polish. No visible flame, no exposed gear, just the dark metal and the faint suggestion of movement within. Heron did not speak. He turned the lever counterclockwise. The chamber clicked once. The sequence began. Liquid pressure flowed inward, the compound dark as shadowed glass, compressed with silent precision. The coil rotated once, twice, then stopped. No sound, no heat, no scent, just stillness. For a moment, the chamber held. Then the air collapsed. Not an explosion, an inversion. Stone folded inward, light pulled to a single point and vanished. Sound disappeared like breath underwater. The seats were gone, so were their occupants. Only one chair spun slowly on its base, then fell to its side. Heron stood behind his shield, the defense of heroes, braced, angled, calculated. The shock passed. The room was half dark, half broken. Ash settled in a slow spiral over the remains on the floor. One wall had caved slightly. The vault above groaned with stress. He exhaled once, lowered the shield, took a step forward, and staggered. A presence behind him, a step, then another, measured, unhurried. Critias, still robed, unscorched, eyes unreadable beneath the hood. He stepped slightly over the cracked floor, cloak trailing like ink, paused behind Heron, surveying the silence. Beautiful, he said. Then, but incomplete. Heron turned, and Critias drove a blade between his ribs. No shout, no flourish, just precision. The blade curved upward, lodged against bone. Heron gasped, his grip tightening on the shield's rim. Critias leaned in, voice low. History needs a villain. Then he stepped back, activated the seal on his mantle. A low pulse of heat. The ceiling groaned, then fire. It swept the upper walls in waves. Glass shattered overhead. A support beam split in two. Critias walked backward into the smoke. His figure dissolved like mist. He did not run. He did not look back. Later, before court, he would only say, "The engine failed." And so did its maker. End of chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Fire Beneath the Tree. The shield saved his spine. That much he knew, the rest was guesswork. Heron awoke to darkness, iron dust, and the slow drip of water onto stone. Every breath stung. His left side refused movement. Something sharp had pierced the outer plate of his thigh harness and lodged in the muscle. He could not remember falling. He remembered light folding. He remembered silence and nothing. Above him, the vault ceiling had collapsed in spirals. A sheet of reinforced marble now lay cracked over his shield, angled just enough to deflect the worst of the impact. The air was dry, laced with ash and the faint tang of burned effluent. His fingers twitched. Good. He reached upward slowly with both arms and pushed. The slab shifted half an inch, not enough. He repositioned, braced one boot against the slanted floor plate, and pushed again. This time it lifted. He slid out, one arm first, then shoulder, then hip. The pain came after. He lay on his side, panting. Dust coated every part of him. His chest burned with each breath. The shield lay beside him, the defense of heroes. Dented, scorched, but whole. His sword, the bane of villains, was still strapped to his back, pressed against stone. He rolled, hissed, stood halfway, looked around. No bodies, only ruin. The vault chamber was unrecognizable. A single support column remained upright. Everything else had collapsed inward. No sound came from above. No searchers, no survivors. He limped forward, half step at a time. Behind the far wall, a crack yawned wide where the pressure ducts had run. Beyond it, a slope. A maintenance tunnel, forgotten, never sealed. He entered. The dark closed around him. Stone became dirt. The air turned wet. Moss coated the walls. He didn't speak. He didn't think. He walked until the sound of water grew louder. Then he collapsed forward into the stream. The current took him, slow, steady. His last sight before unconsciousness. A circle of sky framed by stone. And beyond that, green. He woke to firelight, not flames, coals. Red, low burning, set in a hollowed stone basin. The glow flickered gently against the curved walls, painting shadows like breath caught mid-motion. The ceiling was thatch. The walls were pine planks, half cured, chinked with moss and soot. A single thread of smoke coiled through the room, escaping through a slit in the roof where stars peeked faintly through. He was lying on a reed-matted frame. Straw padding, coarse blanket. His chest was bare, the bandages were clean, wrapped with more care than any field medic had ever showed him. His sword and shield were stacked carefully beside the hearth, not displayed, not hidden, placed with purpose. The defense of heroes, its spine dented, still bore soot along the lower rim. The bane of villains rested unsheathed, oiled and silent. Outside someone stirred. Boots over gravel. Not heavy, not urgent. The door opened with a soft knock from wood on stone. No hinges, just placement and balance. A woman entered. Middle-aged, short. Hair tied back with a strip of waxed linen. Apron stained with herbs. Sleeves rolled to the elbow. She didn't startle. She didn't bow. She knelt beside him, checked his bandages, said nothing. Her hands moved with confidence. She touched only that which needed touching. Changed a wrap, adjusted a splint, civic hands, cook's hands, clean and scarred. When she finished, she wiped her palms on the apron, folded the cloth, and stood. Eat, she said, voice like pine resin, then turned, unhurried, and left. At the foot of the cot, a bowl of broth, still warm, next to it a cup of water, and a square of coarse bread, slightly overbaked at the edges. The smell was simple, root vegetables, some ground lentil, a hint of garlic. He sat up slowly, muscles trembled but held. The pain was dull now, manageable. He looked at the shield, then at the door. He listened for voices, heard only fire and wind. He did not move toward either. Instead, he reached for the bowl, lifted the bread, ate without ceremony. The broth tasted of earth and time. The bread cracked slightly when bitten. The water was cold. Outside, the wind passed through low branches. No bells, no flags, no names spoken, only pine and stillness. The man had been watching for days. Heron noticed him the second morning, tall, white-bearded, spine straight despite the cane. He stood near the edge of the square, where the livestock pen met the grain shed, never closer, never farther. He wore no uniform, only a wool tunic, a cracked belt, and boots that looked older than the village. He spoke on the fourth morning. You swing that arm wrong. Heron looked up from the wood pile. The man approached slowly, cane tapping stone. You're healing well, the man said. Too well to waste it on bad mechanics. They began in silence, no names, no titles, just drills. Stance, footwork, breath timing. The man corrected without touching, demonstrated with a stick carved into the shape of a broken training blade. On the sixth morning, Heron spoke. You were Guild. The man paused and nodded once. Before it was a net. He told stories and fragments, not dates, but impressions. Of the old oath, of the civic keys they once guarded, of the lines that mattered before the Empire turned alignment into obedience. He'd once commanded a hall of 300. Now he lived beside goats and slept on straw. He did not speak of regret, only function. Each day, Heron recovered more. Each night, they sat by the coals. Sometimes the man would ask questions. What did it feel like? Did they see it coming? Why silence? Heron answered only once. It worked. The next day, the man brought out an old chest. Inside, armor of the old guild. Sicarel pattern, reinforced with ephelum threads. Faded, but intact. No air to pass it to, the man said. Heron didn't touch it, not yet. They sparred again. Heron moved slower this time, not from pain, but from thought. The blade's arc was smoother. The shield came up sooner. The old man smiled once, then corrected his elbow again. The wind changed on a silent morning. No bird song, no smoke, at first. Just a dry edge to the air that hadn't been there the day before. Heron stood behind the long house, sharpening the edge of a farming blade. The old man was mending a hinge near the goat pen. The scent reached them both at the same time. Char. Not cooking, not hearth, something deeper. The old man set down his hammer. That's not weather. Heron stood without comment. He reached for the broken sword shaft, the one they sparred with. Then, after a moment, turned instead to the shrine by the door. His gear lay exactly where he had left it. Shield, sword, mantle folded tight. He took them all. The village didn't panic. It didn't know how, but it hushed. Children were called indoors. Stalls were shuttered. One man rode north, not to fight, just to see. He did not return. Heron moved quietly through the paths. He walked the old exit tunnel with the old man. They checked for collapse, cleared brush, unbarred the stone hatch. The man said nothing. The man nodded. Heron said nothing. At twilight, the wind shifted again. The glow crept over the ridge, faint at first, then stronger, orange, white, too clean to be accidental. The old man stood at the top of the ridge, watching it come. Then he turned to Huron. Do what must be done. They shook hands once. No words. Then Huron slipped into the trees, low, quiet, shield on back, blade in hand. He didn't look behind him. The bolt struck before the fire reached the village. No warning, no shout, just the thrum of tension released, a whisper of air displacement, then the sound of ribs breaking inward and the soft collapse of weight. The old man fell forward, the face first into the dust. Huron crouched among the brambles, felt the silence that followed. Not absence, suspension. Even the leaves seemed to still. The guild of righteousness had arrived. No colors, no horns, no cloaks of civic red, only pale gray garb, tight at the sleeves, and faces half covered in burnt cloth. They moved in columns of 3, perfectly spaced. Each held a crossbow, low and steady, like it was part of their arm. No one spoke. The village was not alerted, it was consumed. The first hut collapsed in on itself, set alight with an oil line charge, then the grain bin, then the fence. Children were taken first, not killed, just removed, dragged into black hooded wagons at the edge of the tree line. No cries, no names called. Huron's hands curled in the brush, his blade strapped to his side. The shield was close enough to reach on his back. He did not reach. His breathing slowed. They weren't searching, they were executing. Every step was measured, every shot followed by retrieval. No second bolts wasted. He turned from the clearing, slid into the tree line, below, beneath the thorns. The bramble tore at his sleeves, drew thin lines across his jaw. He moved west, not because of plan, but pull. The wind behind him was black now. Smoke rose high, columned against the sky like a civic monument turned wrong. By nightfall, he reached a stone bridge left from the old republic, moss-grown, cracked at the arch, beneath it a spring. He drank, then stripped his gauntlets and washed the blood from his palms. He touched the shield only once, just the rim, before lowering it into the shallow pool. The moon did not rise, but westward faintly, something pulsed. Not light, not sound, not a place, a weight. He stood, adjusted the strap on his shoulder, and walked. No oath, no vow, only gravity. End of chapter 3. Chapter 4. The Mirror of the Throne. He approached the capital from the east, not through the civic gates, through the work road, the one cut for haulers, not heroes. It curved beneath the aqueduct arches, past the storm runoffs and the slag fields. The wind here smelled of heat-treated iron and old ash. Huron walked slowly, the Sicarel armor beneath his cloak pulled at his joints, heavier now than in the woods. Each step sounded dull against the cracked stone. He passed no checkpoints. The city guards no longer watched the lower tiers, just the sky and the civic square. Above him, the capital, Priimydica, loomed. Towers in brass, flag standards in iron, but no colors flew, just a single, unmarked square, matte black, pressed into the steel. He paused at the edge of the basin. From here he could see the statue. It stood, 20 feet high, etched in polished silverish stone, a likeness of himself, clean-jawed, eyes forward, sword held point down before him. But the plinth had changed. Where once it read, Guardian of the Line, Guardian of Priimydica, it now bore only char, a smear of pitch-black ash where the letters had been burned off. He walked on. The crowds thinned as he neared the civic tier. Children darted between carts. Vendors hawked ration tins and dried root. No one looked him in the eye. On the far wall of the inner market, someone had painted in civic block letters, "Burned us, betrayed them." Below it, the outline of a blade. Not his, just a jagged triangle. Crude, deliberate. He moved through the final alley, tight, narrow, lined with refuse. At the end, a side entry into the administrative hall. One he had used before, one he had designed. He pressed the hidden seal, felt the pressure change, and slipped inside. The stone behind him slid shut. Silence followed, then his footsteps began again, one at a time, toward the records tower. The corridor sloped downward. Heron walked it alone. Footsteps muffled by the felted stone tiles. No lanterns, only dim wall lamps spaced precisely 12 paces apart. Standard for archival compliance. He reached the lower vault and pressed his palm to the seal plate. The door hissed once, unlocked. Inside, silent stacks of flat files lined both walls, some dusted, some missing. One cabinet bore a scorch mark along the handle. Recent. He moved quickly. Shelf 7, drawer 42, then 5 rows right, 9 rows down. The classification key was unchanged. He found the entry for the demonstration day. The record was brief. Project status terminated. Cause unstable engine combustion. Casualties 12. Verified. Saboteur. Huron. Hereward. Civic. Traitor. Notes. Warrant issued. Do not capture. He stared at the lines. No mention of Critias. No note of the forged seal. No entry from the observers. Only a concise narrative. Prepared, printed, enforced. Next drawer. His own name. His own file. 3 inches thick. He flipped through the page. He flipped through page after page. Deployment maps. Metal citations. Manufacturing licenses. Schematic approvals. At the top, a single stamp. All honors revoked. Do not memorialize. He pulled the drawer fully open, removed the folder, tossed it into the hearth at the center of the vault. It caught immediately. Black smoke rose. He moved along the rows, 1 folder, 2, then 20. Burned them all. Not as rebellion, not as vengeance, just silence. When the flames dulled, he removed a single page, not from his own record, but from the demonstration plans. He folded it and tossed it into the fire and walked back the way he came, toward the hall of stone and shadow, where only one man waited. The throne room had no guards, no attendants, no stewards, no music. Just a long corridor of brass-veined stone lit by the hollow light of the upper dome. At its far end sat a single figure, Critias, the consul of domestic affairs, the imperial executive. Or so the plaques now said. He sat with perfect posture, hands folded across his lap. No crown, no seal, only a black ribbon wrapped twice around his right wrist. The mourning mark of the 12. Behind him, the 12-seat dais stood empty, unshattered, unacknowledged. Heron stepped into the hall. No fanfare, no challenge, just boots on polished stone. Critias looked up, smiled. "You came back," he said. Heron did not speak. He walked the central path, past the empty benches, past the old banners, past the place where he once stood for oath. He stopped 5 paces from the throne. Critias stood slowly. "You should know," he said. "There was no pleasure in the lie." Heron's eyes did not move. Critias continued. "The people needed something simple, an image, a wound to name." "You gave them one," Heron said. "I gave them peace." Critias stepped down. "Power is not about rightness. It is about rhythm." "You stabbed me," Heron said. Critias raised his hands. "Not in defense, but in poise. And still, you lived. That too was part of the rhythm. Heron lowered his cloak. The Sicarel armor caught the light, dull, dark, silent. Critias smiled. Critias' smile thinned. You can't kill a nation's story with a shard of metal. No, said Heron, but I can kill a man. He drew the bane of villains still whole. The room dimmed, they clashed. Fire met steel. Smoke churned from the floor tiles, columns cracked. Critias lifted both arms and conjured spirals of black flame laced with azure arcs. He hurled them, wide and precise. Heron deflected one, then another. The third caught his shield dead center and knocked him back. Critias advanced. You think this is righteous, he called out. There is no righteous, no structure, no one. The old republic spoke of divine truth, of moral orders, but where did it lead, Heron? He slammed the floor with his palm. Lightning surged. Heron rose, blade ready. Critias sneered. Right to me. He flung Heron across the dais. Man is the measure of all things, and I... He quickly lifted Heron into the air with one hand on his neck. Am! Critias punched him in the ribs and broke them despite the armor. Critias punched him in the guts and managed to make Heron cough up blood. Ultimate! Critias brought Heron's face down to his knee with a force hard enough to break a ship in two. Man! He punched him out of his own grip. Heron was sent skidding, armor ringing. Heron gasped for air but got back on his knees and then back on his feet and stood, slower now. Smoke curled from his pauldrons. He raised his sword for one last charge. Critias summoned a column of flame. The moment they collided, the blade shattered. The ringing note like glass struck heaven. Only the hilt remained with a single jagged shard. Heron did not stop. He tackled Critias, slammed him against the wall, and drove the shard right into his heart. Critias' eyes widened. He reached up, fingers shaking, and gripped Heron's forearm. With a breath like breaking porcelain, he whispered, Please, save our people. Then fell. Heron stepped back, hand still on the broken hilt. He looked up. Through the high window, he saw the square, his statue collapsing. No applause, just the echo of the past turning to ash. Then the sound of boots. The throne room doors rattled. Someone shouted for entry. Heron looked once more at the shard, then placed it gently at the foot of the throne, and waited. They did not knock. The throne room doors thundered under the weight of fists, then boots, then steel. The hinges bent. A voice shouted orders. Another called for backup. Heron stood still. He faced the doors, not in defiance, but in pause. Beside him, Critias lay slumped against the wall. The shard remained in Heron's hand. He looked down at it again. The bane of villains. It glinted dull red in the firelight, still coiling across the chamber floor. A symbol now, not a weapon. He turned from the throne, walked to the center of the hall, and placed the shard gently on the stone. The doors split inward. 6 guards poured through, weapons drawn, eyes wild. They stopped at the sight. Critias dead, the throne empty, Heron unarmed. One barked a command. Another approached slowly, shield raised. Heron raised his hands, not in surrender, in refusal. They struck him anyway. First with the butt of a spear, then with boots, fists, curses. He did not block the blows, did not cry out. When they bound his wrist in barbed cord, he did not resist. When they tore the mantle from his back, he let it fall. They dragged him through the civic square. The people lined the steps, silent, expectant. The shadow behind them now lay in pieces. The sword snapped, the face scorched, the nameplate missing. Someone in the crowd threw a piece of ash. It struck Heron in the cheek. He did not flinch. Someone else spat. The procession did not stop. By midday, they reached the docks. He was tied to a post on a prisoner cart, flanked by armored riders. No one looked him in the eye. From the ship beside the quay, a civic officer stepped down. He checked the record slate, then looked up. This one bound for Priimydica? A nod. The officer signed. 4-month display run approved. Heron blinked once. The salt wind caught his hair. Somewhere above, a bell rang. Not for war, not for mourning, just another mark in the civic schedule. The officer motioned the guards forward. Heron was lifted, loaded, locked into place. The ship pulled from dock before the hour's end. The city faded behind him, blurred by salt and blood and silence. The days blurred. Each morning he was paraded, each evening displayed. From Priimydica to Illyria, from Illyria to Cnidia, from Cnidia to Protium. Some cheered, most stared. He was chained in place beneath banners of the 12. The plaque above him changed with each city, but always read the same beneath the civic seal. Heron hereward, once guardian, now traitor. No food until dusk, no water until speech was offered. He gave none. In Illyria, they threw rotten food at him, bread soaked in brine, bones picked clean. One boy shouted, "What's wrong, Heron? Don't you like the proper meal of traitors?" In Cnidia, the guards tied Heron to a post and let any citizen who wanted take a swing at him with a long metal rod. Heron was dragged back into the cart, barely breathing after that. He said nothing. At the edge of Protium, the guards changed formation, no longer pageantry, now restraint. They knew the colonials here. They feared them. The cart hit a rut. Heron's lips split open upon the iron post. He didn't react. A storm broke as they entered the civic square. The rain hit like hammers. Civic lights flickered. A dog barked. A woman wept. Heron, arms bound above his head, lifted his gaze for the first time in weeks. Before him, the old harbor. And beyond it, a figure in white standing alone on the quay. The guards cursed. One barked orders, another fumbled for chains, one reached for a blade, and then the lights went out. Every lantern, every single flare, gone. In the dark, a voice rang clear. Let him down. And the cords loosened. One by one, a second voice shouted, then silence, then steel clattered to stone. When the light returned, half the guards were gone. The others were unconscious. And Heron, still standing, wrists raw, blood down one arm, was free. The figure in white stepped forward, not a soldier, not a servant, just a man with a staff. And behind him, two others emerged from the misted square. One carried a curved blade, the other a spear. Heron took a step forward and did not fall. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5. The Man Who Was Many. The flames cracked low and blue. They didn't flicker like the hearths of home, no rhythm, no warmth. Just steady combustion, silent and slow, as if even the fire was listening. Across from Heron sat a man with eyes too calm for the war-scarred world. Black hair streaked with silver, weathered skin that didn't match the smoothness of his voice. No armor, just a simple travel cloak and a wooden ring on one hand. Sigil sat beside him, cross-legged, sharpening a thin-bladed knife against a wet stone. He had been the figure in the white cloak familiar. He hadn't spoken since the camp was made. Heron stirred. His side still ached from the last strike in Cnidia. The bruises on his ribs were no longer purple, now black. He had not asked any questions, not when they cut him free from the cage, not when they handed him back his armor, not when they led him through the mountain paths to the safe house now hidden in the stone. It was the man with black hair streaked with silver that spoke first. His name was Noman. Do you remember your first fear? Heron blinked. The question landed like a stone in cold water. I remember my first failure, Heron said. Then you remember both, said Noman. Sigil chuckled faintly. Let this old man speak, Heron. He's earned more than one evening. Heron looked back at the fire. The sparks rose straight into the vented ceiling and vanished. Noman leaned forward. "Before I was named Noman," he said, "I fell." The wind pressed faintly at the stone flaps outside the door. "I was a boy, a curious one. I leaned too far over the edge of a well in Reamdor." Heron glanced at Triferus, seated just beyond the light's reach. Or at least as he would come to be known as Triferus. A young man seated just beyond the light's reach. He didn't move, just listened. "I don't remember hitting the bottom," said Noman, "but I remembered what spoke to me in the dark." The fire dimmed slightly, just once, as if in acknowledgement. It said, "You will be many, you will forget, you will weep, and you will walk again." Heron looked up. The fire no longer seemed cold. "I woke up 2 days later," Noman said, "in a place I did not recognize." The fire had died lower now. Heron could just make out the silhouette of Sigil placing new wood on the embers. "I tried to explain what had happened. The elders of Reamdor thought I'd struck my head. They praised my survival, gave me books to read, sent me to studies. I excelled, not because I was wise, but because I was terrified of falling again." Triferus shifted by the wall. A soft clink, his elbow brushing the metal clasp of his blade. "I became a tactician by 16, Noman continued. "A general by 19. I commanded with precision, conquered with almost surgical restraint." A pause. "I told myself it was for peace, for order." Sigil snorted lightly, not mockingly, just enough to say, "That's what they all say." Heron leaned forward. "What happened?" he asked. Noman didn't answer at first. Instead, he picked up a stick and stirred the coals. "They gave me medals," he said, "then cities, then parades." He dropped the stick. "The boy who fell into the well became a man with too many hands and no memory of what it meant to be afraid." The wind outside rose faintly. Not a howl, not a scream, just wind. Heron nodded, slow. "I know that man," Heron said. "Or at least I've seen him in mirrors." Noman looked up. "Then maybe you'll understand why I left it all, why I walked away and tried to forget every command I ever gave." Triferus looked toward the fire now, still silent, but listening more closely. "I thought peace was something one could hold like a banner," Noman said. "I hadn't yet learned it was something carried like a wound." I died during a festival." Noman's voice was level, too even, almost clinical. "One moment I was raising a cup of wine to the queen of Reamdor. Next, I was gasping for air with 6 knives in my back." Heron blinked. Sigil paused mid-sharpen. Triferus turned fully toward the fire. "I was reborn a year later, same city, different district, and this time I remembered." He let that hang in the air for a while. Not for drama, but wait. "I remembered the feeling of command, of conquest, of silence after orders. I remembered which friends had betrayed me, and I remembered the well." Heron's brow furrowed. "How?" Noman gave a quiet smile. "Some things live deeper than the body." He went on. "I was clever this time, hid the memories until I needed them, proved myself anew, gained the court's trust, and then, one day, I stood before the king and told him something only his great-grandfather had known." Heron sat forward. "What did he do?" "Named me royal advisor," Noman replied, "and built a room in the palace just for me. No doors, just guards, scrolls, and silence." Sigil chuckled. "Let me guess, you hated it." Noman didn't smile this time. "No, I loved it. For a while, I thought I'd finally made peace with memory." He picked up a coal from the edge of the fire, held it for just a second before dropping it into a bowl of snow. Steam hissed upward. "But the world doesn't care about memory." He paused. This tribe, the Arthagians, came, and with them, a name I hadn't heard since before my first death, Magani." Heron stilled. He cursed me, Noman said, not with disease, not with flame. Noman's voice grew softer, but with a rage that wasn't mine, a rage I couldn't control. I woke up in my own home, and the family I had loved in this life was no more. The flames were low now, not dying, just waiting. Noman sat back against the stone wall, hands folded, eyes distant. I buried them myself, he said. With clean hands and a sword, I swore never to lift again. No one moved. Outside, the wind had picked up. It whispered against the rock joints like breath behind a door. I tried to disappear, but Reamdor would not let me. They called for me to return to fight. The Orthagians were still advancing. He paused, not for breath, for memory. I went. I told myself it was to protect the innocent. I lied. Heron watched the coals pulse red beneath the black. Sigil no longer sharpened his blade. I became what I feared most. I commanded slaughter with the same precision I once used to build aqueducts. I turned cities into warnings. I had Magani dragged before me in chains. His jaw tightened. I strangled him with my bare hands. Triferus spoke softly. And then Noman looked at him. Then I looked at what I had done, and I realized I had not avenged anything. If my family were still alive at this point, they would have seen me become the monster I once promised to defeat. The cave seemed colder now. I took my life that night. Not in guilt, not in despair. He looked at Heron. In clarity. Sigil stirred the fire. Some wounds bleed backward, he said. And some men bleed until they see the truth. Noman nodded. I was born again a year later. This time I sought no power, no glory. I read. I studied. I walked alone. He looked toward the opening of the cave, where the fog pressed faintly against the horizon. But even silence has its price. The fire cracked low. Noman sat with his hands folded again, the lines of age in his knuckles casting long shadows in the ember light. I thought I could vanish, he said. After Arthagia, after the fire, I thought if I read enough, if I isolated enough, I could forget. He looked up. But forgetting is a kind of violence, especially when you know what you've done. Heron sat silent. Triferus, too. The wind outside was soft now, as if the world itself were listening. I became a monk, Noman said, in the fourth life. I told myself peace was enough, that if I ever touched a blade again, I could undo what I had done. He reached toward the fire and added a small log. It didn't work. I couldn't forget the faces, so I studied them. Not the faces themselves, but the kind of world that made them mine to unmake. He unrolled the scroll from his satchel, worn parchment, smooth with age. Wrote some of it down, treatises, ethics, civic treatises from the old days. And later, the theories of balance, of logic, of healing. Triferus finally spoke. You became a doctor? A surgeon, a scholar, an inventor. Noman's voice was dry but sure. I saved more than I could count over the years. But I still woke with blood in my mouth and guilt in my soul. Sigil returned with a flask, set it by Noman's side. Noman didn't drink. I found peace for others, he said. Not for myself. The guilt doesn't age like we do. It always stays sharp. Huron shifted slightly. Then why keep going? Noman's eyes reflected the fire. Because I cannot undo what I've done. But I can make sure no one else carries it. Outside, the fog coiled slightly closer to the ridge. The compass next to him rattled once quietly, and the embers burned on. When the war came, this war, I tried to stay out of it. Noman's voice was quieter now, almost lost beneath the sound of the wind. Heron looked up from the compass in his hand. The ring still glowed faintly. The needles had steadied for now. I had found a small island near the edge of Volstrom's charts, Noman continued. A place where I could live without mirrors or memory, but war doesn't care for solitude. Triferus leaned closer to the fire. They found you? No, said Noman. They found a reason I couldn't ignore. He unrolled another scroll, newer, tightly bound. The people of Volstrom. They thought magic would save them. It didn't. Their soldiers knew rituals, not formations. Their walls were tall, but unfortified. When the Priimydian, he looked at both Heron and Triferus, when the Priimydian artillery came, it was like lightning against parchment. His eyes closed. He closed his eyes briefly. I led what I could, taught them tactics, resistance, evasion, sabotage. But we were outnumbered, outgunned. We were outnumbered, outmatched. And when the outer wall collapsed, the panic was immediate. Triferus frowned. What did you do? What I had to. Noman's voice was still even. There was a narrow road to the inner gate. If we could hold it, the rest might make it inside. I took 30 men. We stood there while the rest fled. Some cried, some prayed, some just waited. He looked toward the cave's mouth where the light was thinning. When they came, the Priimydians, they didn't even slow down. Their weapons were precise, loud. The first volley shredded our barricades. The second took half my men. Heron leaned forward. And the third? I don't remember. Noman's hand tightened around his cloak. Just the sound of horns. Priimydian. Then fire, real fire, not conjured. It rose like a wall and held the Priimydians back. And from it stepped Sigil, gleaming like a myth. Beside him, Triferus, and behind them, an army. He looked to Triferus and nodded once. I collapsed there, not because I was wounded, but because the world had changed. And I knew it wouldn't wait long. Sigil spoke now softly, and I gave him a choice. Noman nodded. He asked if I wanted peace. Heron waited. I told him no, I wanted purpose, even if it meant carrying it all. Outside, the fog pressed closer. The fire crackled. The final life of Noman had begun. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6. The Boy Who Trusted Nothing. The horses were gone. They had been there at dawn, tethered, fed, saddled by Sigil's hand, but something in the dark had spooked them. Oh, whoopsies. Forgot about this last part of chapter 5, sorry. The silence stretched. Heron poked at the fire, breaking the crust of ash to expose the orange heart beneath. You didn't have to tell us all that, he said finally. I did, Noman replied. Some truths only matter once they're spoken. Triferus hadn't moved. He sat with hands around his knees, staring into the coals as if they could show him something. They didn't. Outside, the fog began to whisper, not in words, but in the suggestion of movement. The wind had stopped. The air was thick like breath held too long, and from the far trees, even the night birds fell silent. Heron rose, his breath smoked faintly against the stone wall. He flexed the fingers on his right hand, still slow to heal. The scars itched. Noman stood too. He adjusted the sash at his waist, then checked the knife at his belt. Not for use, but just out of habit and for memory. Across the fire, Sigil stepped forward. He held out the compass. Its face no longer spun. It glowed with a steady blue light, the kind that did not flicker. The time is near, he said. Heron took the compass and nodded. Triferus rose beside him. Noman said nothing, just folded his hands and bowed once. But Sigil did not turn to follow. Instead, he moved toward the entrance of the cave where a tall horse, cloaked in dark leather tack, waited patiently. Sigil, the bard that the locals had come to know, ran a hand down its neck. I won't be traveling with you, he said. Heron furrowed his brow. Why not? Sigil slung one leg over the saddle and settled in. There's something on the path ahead, he said. Not just fog, not just beasts. He looked at them each in turn. I have a suspicion, something older, stronger. It must be handled before it wanders too close to where you're going. You mean to fight it? Triferus asked. No, Sigil said. I mean to distract it, delay it. Let it know someone's watching, that someone still remembers what it was. He adjusted the reins. You'll still face trials, he added. Not the worst of them. Not yet. This journey is yours, but I'll clear the way as best I can. He paused. When the compass spins again, and I mean truly spins, and when you have obtained a very special sword, and I mean a truly special sword, you must throw the sword into the sky. If I'm still alive, I'll come. He turned the horse west, toward the dark edge of the trees. The hoofbeats were soft at first, then gone. Only the echo remained. The fire behind them pulsed once, then died. Actual end of chapter 5. Chapter 6. The boy who trusted nothing. The horses were gone. They had been there at dawn, tethered, fed, saddled by Sigil's hand, but something in the dark had spooked them. No hoof prints, no snapped reins, only churned soil and the sound of nothing moving. Noman stood by the tree line, squinting into the fog. Heron adjusted the compass. It spun once, hesitated, then pointed west, deeper into the mountain cut. There was no path, only overgrown stonework and scattered gear from ancient failed marches. Sigil had left them more than direction, but not enough to carry them the whole way. He knew they'd run, Triferus muttered. Would have told us otherwise. Heron knelt by a patch of disturbed ground. He touched the dirt, then the wind. He wanted us to walk, he said finally. He thinks it matters. Triferus scoffed. Of course he does. Everything matters to him. The morning light was thin, caught in low cloud and pine ash. Heron stepped forward, glancing once more at the compass. Noman moved with him, silent. After a moment, Triferus followed. They walked half a mile before Heron spoke. I know Noman, he said, enough to see his weight, his question. He stopped, turned to Triferus. But you're still the sealed book. Triferus stared ahead. No need to open it. I think there is, Heron replied. If this is a quest of the soul, then we can't carry yours like a closed box. The silence held a few more paces. Then Triferus exhaled. He didn't slow, but he began. My name's Triferus Taliesin, son of an Illyrian seamstress and a Priimydian administrator. Both dead now. Plague got them. He didn't check for reaction. I was 10 when the magistrate took our home. Said we didn't meet the inheritance quota. I met their next measure, age and blood, so they sent me to the guild's school. Heron looked forward again, letting the words come. That's where I learned to count only losses. The path narrowed. Roots clawed from the stone. Ahead, a cold stream ran black across the trail. None of them turned back. He didn't dream of swords back then. Only blankets warm enough to chase away the cough. Only hands that held rather than pushed. Triferus stepped over the stream. Heron followed. Noman paused, studied the depth, then crossed last. There was no funeral for them, Triferus said. No ceremony, just a notice. The house of Taliesin is hereby dissolved. That was it. In uppercase lettering on parchment, pinned to the door like a bill unpaid. The trees above them groaned with age. Crows stirred but did not call. I waited in the square for them to tell me where I was going. A man in black, GOR badge on his sleeve, handed me a travel slip and said, "You'll find structure there." He smiled, but there was no humor in it. It was called the School of Refit. We called it something else. Heron didn't ask, he already knew. The path turned rocky. Thistles cracked underfoot. The compass still pointed west. I was small, Triferus continued. Didn't talk much, didn't fight, so they put me with the others who didn't pass first muster. He adjusted the straps on his pack. Made an example of us, first to march, first to fall, first to be forgotten. Heron stopped at a ridge overlook. The forest fell away to reveal a distant cliff line veiled in light mist. Triferus stepped beside him. By 12, I learned how to punch without getting hit back. By 15, how to take a beating without a sound. By 16, how to pass inspection without saluting. He turned to the trees again, and by 17, I stopped hoping for any promotions. The sun broke through for a moment, scattered across mossy stone. When I was 18, I met my friend, Xavier. Smart. Too smart. Like one of those mice that experimenters, like one of those mice that are smart enough to get the cheese in a maze, but not smart enough to realize it's all a trap. Said he wanted to change things. Said there was more to the GOR than loyalty, inspections, and missing orders. Triferus exhaled. I told him he was stupid and crazy. He said that meant I'd survive. They moved again. None of them spoke for a while, but all three listened. Triferus kept his eyes ahead, and for a while that kid and I, we were brothers. The trail narrowed as they passed beneath a stone arch split with vines. Heron moved first, brushing aside the hanging moss. Triferus followed, but slower now. Slower because this was the part of the story that didn't feel like story at all. We started walking the perimeter during off hours, he said, of our encampment after the invasion of Cnidia. Whenever we landed at Priimydica. The dining hall at the fortifications was too loud. The barracks were too cold. Xavier liked the sound of water, and I humored him. Noman nodded, but said nothing. There was a man, Triferus continued. Mortimer. Had eyes like dull knives. A GOR inspector. He watched us everywhere. They crossed a gully, boots slick with dew. Triferus steadied himself with one hand on the embankment. Xavier said the man kept logs on him. Said he'd seen the file. Said it mentioned something called Project Threshold. Heron glanced back. The name meant nothing to him. To us, it meant disappearances, Triferus said. People who asked questions stopped showing up. Sometimes their bunks were cleared before we even noticed they were missing. They reached a plateau where the trees bent back. A thin mist rolled in, cool on their cheeks. Triferus stopped there. One night, we heard we'd both been assigned to the same ship, deployment for Volstrom. Xavier said it was too clean, said the timing was wrong. Thought I was being paranoid, as he always was. Heron adjusted the compass, but it still pointed west. So we walked, went to the falls, the ones past the barracks. His voice dipped. There were men there, 5 of them, armed to the teeth. The mist thickened slightly. Mortimer was waiting, told Xavier to come with him, told me to report back to the docks. Triferus touched the blade on his back. Well, Triferus touched the blade on his side, not out of need, but memory. I didn't move. I couldn't. Xavier had smiled at me. He said, "It's all right, I'll catch up." Then he wrestled with Mortimer, and they both fell into the water below. There was a pause. Little did I know, Xavier caught a ledge halfway down, held there for hours. Heron waited. He made it out, visited me later, said he wasn't dead. Thought that was pretty funny since he was standing right there. Said he'd seen things in the water, things not just reflected, revealed. Triferus turned his face to the wind. Next day, the bunks were cleared, no mention of him anywhere, no official record that he ever existed. Noman finally spoke. "You still believe he had?" Triferus's jaw tightened. Later on, I'd come to bury him on an isle after the storm. They walked on. None of them looked back at the trees. Triferus shifted the strap on his pack. The trees thin there, wind rising, salt in the air, below waves crashing against the hills like fists that never tired from a nearby lake. Or rather, a small pond. "We boarded near dusk," he said. "Loaded with infantry, gear, half a hold of grain. Weather held for 3 days." Noman glanced up. Heron kept walking. "We made jokes. Volstrom was still far, but spirits were high. They had no idea what waited." He paused. No one ever does. The path narrowed, sloped toward an outcrop. Huron offered a hand. Triferus ignored it. Fourth night, winds changed. No storm, not at first, just quiet, dead calm. Then, clouds came all at once, hollow, black, like a ceiling falling. He pointed toward the horizon, though it held only sky now. Lightning came without sound. Masts snapped like twigs. Someone screamed Xavier's name. They stepped carefully down the loose rock shelf. Huron caught Noman as he slipped. No one spoke of it. I woke up on the sand. No ship, no Xavier. Triferus' voice lowered. I buried what I could find. 2 boots, half a cloak, 1 name. He knelt, picked up a stone, then let it drop. There was no signal fire, no ships to follow, just gulls and the smell of salt rot. It was as if the Empire had chosen our voyage to get rid of all of its undesirables. He rose, shoulders squared now. Then came the voice. Heron looked sideways. Noman slowed slightly. Sigil didn't shout, didn't call me by rank or number. He just said, "If you're done grieving, there's work to do." Triferus laughed once, sharp, humorless. Didn't say sorry, didn't say welcome, just handed me a piece of dried meat and started walking. He looked at Heron, at Noman. I don't know why I followed this strange man on this island, but I followed. The area where they had camped vanished behind the ridge. Before them, the western woods, quiet, winding, the compass still pointed forward. They reached a clearing before dusk. Tall grass swayed between stones that bore no names, just worn edges in the curve of time. The mist here was thinner, but the quiet deeper. Heron removed his pack and lowered himself to sit on a nearby boulder. Noman remained standing, eyes on the horizon. The wind shifted. A flicker of birds moved beyond the tree line. Sometime or other, Triferus continued, Sigil asked me a question. He asked me, "What are you afraid of?" It's the same question I remember my parents asking me when I was a boy, and it was storming outside, and the same question Xavier asked me before he did something stupid. Triferus sighed and looked at the ground. I told him I was afraid of caring again, losing again, everyone I ever cared about. And Sigil nodded, like that answer had been given before. We camped together for several nights, talked of pain and power, of what the world takes, and what it sometimes gives, of a sword, special, not yet seen, but promised, that would respond not to bloodline or fame, but to the heart of a man who understood both fear and hope. An eagle flew overhead in the direction opposite to where they were going. They all stopped a bit to give it a quick glance before continuing along their path. Eventually, Sigil told me of the journey, the one we're on right now, of Heron, of Noman, of Tenebral, that darkness which the locals said lied in the west beyond. That's when he told me that the road ahead needs someone who's learned what the world can steal and who still chooses to walk it. Guess I'm not alone in that. Triferus looked ahead. And it's not much, but I guess I chose to keep on walking. He turned back to the path, voice lower now. Still not sure if it was hope or just spite. Heron stood and placed a hand on his shoulder. It was enough. They moved on. 3 men, no horses, no banners, just a compass, a name unspoken, and the weight of what they carried. They made camp beneath a ring of leaning stones, moss curled over the edges like scars that never closed. Heron turned the compass slowly in his hands. It no longer pointed true. It trembled, the needle flickering, like breath caught between choices. Triferus sat nearest the fire. Noman crouched opposite, head tilted, the ember light catching faint lines in his brow. But my friend, Noman said, voice low, you have yet to say how you came to meet me in Volstrom, with the Reamdorians at your back and Sigil at your side. Triferus nodded. He nudged a coal with a charred stick, watching the ash rise. After the storm took Xavier, he said, I thought I'd been left with nothing, just a name, a grave without stone, and the sound of water closing over everything I'd known. He looked up. But the island, as you know, wasn't empty. Sigil was already there, waiting as if he'd always known. After that question that Sigil asked me, he hadn't said much. He just built the fire, offered food, left silence where it belonged. It took days, Triferus said, maybe weeks, I don't know. He didn't press. He just listened, said the same thing he told you, Noman, that I could choose to hope more than I feared, that there was still a quest, still a road. Huron's eyes stayed on the flame, but he was listening. Eventually, Triferus said, he asked me if I could face the world again, even if it meant losing more than I'd already lost. He exhaled once, slow. I told him yes. We set sail for Reamdor. No banners, no envoy, only Sigil and the kind of stories that made kings listen and tremble at once. The kings of Reamdor remembered him, Triferus said. Not just his name, but what he stood for. When he told them Volstrom would fall without them, they believed it. The flame snapped softly between them. It wasn't easy. There were councils, fears, but they came. I stood with their generals, and when we made landfall at Volstrom's edge, I saw what you were holding, Noman. I saw your line breaking. He turned to him, and I saw your face when the horns sounded. Noman nodded once deep. The flames rose, Triferus said, and from them Sigil walked forward like fire remembered its shape. The wind shifted. The fire dimmed slightly as if listening. He stayed behind to lead what came next, said the road would need us more than any army would. Triferus looked toward the dark edge of the trees. So we came here, and now the road waits. That's how we rescued you, by the way, Heron. Sigil guided us. No one spoke. Only the slow crackle of settling branches and the faint churn of wind through unseen leaves. Then Heron stood. We've all lost something, he said, but we're all still walking. And from the edge of the firelight, the compass spun once more, then settled, faintly toward the west. End of chapter 6. Yes. Chapter 7, The Forest of Dreams and Teeth. The trees changed before they saw them. First, the bark, no longer vertical but split in corkscrew ridges like old scars, reopened. Then the roots curled not into the earth, but outward reaching. Then the air itself, brittle with iron, tasting like something that remembered blood. The compass trembled, not spun, but trembled. Heron held it level, checked again. The needle quivered, hovering westward, but never still. It pulsed with the same slow rhythm as the fog that clung to the underbrush, not drifting, not dispersing, just waiting, as though it were on a table during an earthquake. Noman slowed beside him. These woods don't breathe like they should. Triferus glanced toward the ridgeline. No birds, no bugs, no decay, Heron added, and yet everything here rots. They moved forward without speaking. The forest opened gradually, revealing not a clearing but a scar. Charred earth ringed a low stone perimeter. Square, staggered, slumped at the edges. Beyond it stood a collapsed Priimydian fort, a squat bastion of effluent and timber, half consumed by moss and time. The walls were blackened. The towers cracked. Yet something in the structure still hummed faintly, as if it dreamed of power. Heron stepped through the outer gate. Inside, he saw them. Engines, 7 or 8, collapsed or scattered or splayed across the inner yard. Some were carts, others turrets, but the shapes were unmistakable. Pressure coils, gear shafts, rail-fused housings, his designs, or something that had learned from his designs. One engine still bore the half-twisted remnants of a spear launcher. Another had legs half-assembled, jointed like an insect, rusted through. Triferus crouched beside a broken axle. These didn't fall in battle. No signs of struggle, said Noman, pointing to a still intact row of bolts. They were abandoned. Heron walked to the inner barracks, a collapsed shell of tinder and vault-plated brick, and pushed open a warped door. Dust rose, spores of something older inside, scattered tools, a broken ration crate. A single leather-bound case tucked beneath a collapsed bunk. He pried it open. Inside, a rolled parchment, cracked with age but still legible. Heron unrolled it on the floor. A map. Lines of fortifications, 12 in total, all positioned along the same line from the northernmost part to the southernmost part of the continent, east of the Cnidian Mountains and its forests. The ink was precision pressed, stamped with a seal at the bottom right corner, the personal mark of Critias. Below the line of forts, layered troop symbols, meticulously arranged. Each square denoted a company, each triangle a mobile siege cart, between them concentric arcs indicating fire ranges, pressure fields, fallback lines. At the center of the page, bold in red ink, Ordnance Formation 88C, Fall Protocol Initiative, Critias, Office of Imperial Executive. Triferus leaned over Heron's shoulder. This is a battle plan. No, Heron said. This is the battle plan. He traced the arcs with one finger. 12 forts, 8 divisions, heavy eastern lean, fallback positions in Righam's interior. Then he stopped, brows furrowed. Triferus saw it too. But then, where is everyone? Heron was quiet for a moment. Then, I don't know. He began rolling the map up again, slower now, but in the back of his mind a flicker. Old reports from the westernmost border route, supply chains that never quite aligned, garrisons with names but no requisition logs, dismissed, then forgotten, until now. He folded the map and returned it to its case. We shelter here, he said. We'll post watch in thirds. I'll take the first. Neither man objected. By the time night fully fell, the fog had reached the walls, but had not yet crossed them. Heron put on his helmet and tightened the chin strap, just in case something else was waiting in the mist. The fire had settled low, not for lack of fuel. There was plenty of wood, dry and misted, but as if the flame itself had become cautious. Triferus slept first, then Noman. Heron just sat inside the western tower shell, wrapped in silence. He'd hung a lantern over the parapet and placed the compass beneath it. The needle no longer pointed west. It spun, slow at first, then faster. Heron didn't speak. He simply watched it. Outside the walls, the fog began to rise. In sleep, Triferus found himself in a home he did not recognize, but somehow remembered. The walls were paneled with carved Elurian script. The hearth was warm. A woman hummed in the next room, low, off-key, familiar. In his arms, a child slept. Her breathing matched his. Rain tapped the windows softly. A table stood nearby, set for 3. He wanted to speak, but the moment was too full of the thing he had wanted most, but also feared. A life that could be lost. He blinked, and the child stirred. Outside the rain slowed, but no shadows crossed the windows. No knock came, no officer, no fire, only peace, and peace held. Noman stood on a path that looped gently through green hills. His step did not ache, his bones did not protest. He walked beside people he loved, all of them, not just from one life, but all lives. A father from one, a son from another, a friend who had died too young, but smiled now as if death had never come. There was no war, no dream door, no names to remember, because nothing had ever been lost. The wind carried no ash, only music, and still something in his chest flickered. Not pain, not memory, a feeling he didn't want to name. Back in the waking world, Heron adjusted the lantern's hook. The fog curled just below. The rampart now, thick, steady, patient. It had not breached the walls, but it had learned their shape. Heron looked to the sleeping figures. Neither stirred. He walked the inner perimeter once, glancing at each of the broken engines, each wall bolt, each gap in the foundation. He checked the door, then the parapet, then the compass again, still spinning. He returned to his seat, set his shield beside him, kept his hand near the hilt. He didn't feel tired, but the silence whispered as if it knew the names of the men who dreamed and meant to take them back. It started with a shape, not a noise, not a cry, just motion. Low, near the far wall. Beyond the ruined gate, a figure, pale, jointless, half the height of a man, but stretched unnaturally. It moved like breath held too long. Heron rose, no signal from the others, still asleep, still unmoved. He tightened the grip on his gauntlet and moved toward the nearest engine chassis. Pronunciation. Another figure emerged, then 2 more. They didn't walk. They advanced, as if tugged forward by a rhythm only they could hear. The fog pulled around their legs, swallowing their feet, muting the crunch of ash under toe. Heron crouched near the edge of a broken pressure cart. Spear launcher intact, hydraulic feed cracked, power rail salvageable. He moved quickly. A spare coil from a collapsed turret, 2 working gears, 3 feet of jointed pipe, and a spine sprocket still fused to the wheel mount. It wasn't a weapon yet, but it could be. Behind him, the beasts closed in. Their faces were smooth. No eyes, no mouths, just skin, pale and tight, pulled where expression should be. Heron fastened the launcher's cord to a turning brace, rigged the gear strike to rotate on coil. He mounted the makeshift weapon to a still-anchored engine cart and twisted it into alignment. The first spear fired. It didn't miss. The beast struck, staggered, folded like wet leather, and dissolved into mist. A second spear charged. Another spear, another shot. But the coil hissed, too hot. He grabbed a wrench, reset the bearing, manually forced the wheel back into place. 2 more shapes climbed the wall. A third. One landed on the rampart above him and peered downward, not looking, just sensing. Heron lit a flare beside the cart. The fog recoiled slightly, but only briefly. They were learning. They weren't just moving toward him. They were encircling. He turned toward the shelter. Triferus and Noman hadn't moved, still breathing, still dreaming. Heron's jaw clenched. He sprinted to the far engine, one with thicker plating and a more intact wheelbase. Its frame was warped, but mobile, enough to bear weight. He pulled the ignition coil from his back pouch, snapped it into the engine's underside. The console clicked once, a faint glow along the vented intake. He climbed up, fastened one strap to each of the other's shoulders, and hauled them one at a time onto the rear panel. They didn't stir, but the fog did. It pushed forward now, deliberate, pressing into the gaps between broken stone and twisted steel. The beast followed. The gate creaked behind them. Heron hit the ignition lever, the engine growled, then the wheels turned. The gate splintered behind them as the cart broke through. Ash kicked up in waves, leaves scattered, fog surged after them like water through a cracked seal. Heron held the control lever with one hand and braced the rear plating with the other. The engine sputtered once, then stabilized, humming just loud enough to drown out the scraping howl behind them. The wheels caught the slope, then accelerated. Pines blurred, stones shot past like teeth half buried in soil. The air burned cold against Heron's face, but the heat from the undercarriage turned his armor slick with sweat. Behind him, Noman and Triferus remained still, too still. The fog did not chase blindly. It curled along their path, guiding the beasts ahead of them. Pale limbs flickered through the trees, shapes darted between trunks, silent and precise. One landed on the cart. It struck hard, a full-bodied weight that slammed Heron against the console. The creature's claws hooked into the rear edge, dragging itself forward. Heron reached for his sword, but the creature knocked it out of his hands. The beast raised one arm, and then froze, not from fear, from sound, from breath. Triferus's. The younger man opened his eyes, wide, unfocused. He saw the creature above him, but more than that, he saw the child's face from his dream, the one laughing in the house that never was. He whispered, "I'm sorry," and struck upward with the wrench beside him. The blow cracked against the beast's jaw, if it had one, and knocked it sideways. It didn't fall. Noman stirred. His eyes opened slowly, not in confusion, in grief. He saw the fog, the beast, the crash of it all. He remembered the feeling of walking beside his family. All lives healed, he whispered, "Not yet," and grabbed a spear from the cart's rear housing and rammed it into the creature's spine. It hissed, not with voice, but with heat, and began to melt. Triferus caught its arm before it collapsed and shoved it off the cart. The beast hit the ground and vanished into mist. The engine roared louder now, but not from speed, from stress. The wheels began to drag, the frame buckled slightly. Heron adjusted the heat intake, redirected the flow. "Brace," he called. They did. The cart slammed into a root, flipped once, landed on its side, and skidded through mud until it stopped. Silence, then breath, then coughs. Triferus rolled over, blinking. Noman sat up slowly, checking his ribs. Heron pulled himself upright, blood running down one side of his head. They were alive, bruised, burned, scraped, but alive. Around them, the fog had paused as if puzzled. Heron checked the compass, still spinning. He wiped the blood from his brow. "We've got to move," he said, and they did. They walked for 2 more days. No food, no fire, just silence and pace. The fog had vanished behind them after the crash, but not completely. It lingered just outside of vision, thickening the tree line, curling against the horizon like a thought not yet voiced. Triferus limped. Noman bled from one shoulder. Heron said nothing. He carried the broken compass in one hand and the hilt of his sword in the other. The compass had not stopped spinning. On the morning of the 3rd day, they crested a rise and looked back. Where the cart had crashed, where they had fought and bled, a wall of fog now stood, dense, structured, watching. And in the center of that fog, a silhouette, tall and moving, shaped like a man. They couldn't see a face, but the shape was enough. None of them spoke. They just started running. The path bent toward a rocky basin. The air turned dry and the trees thinned, not by season, but by memory. Bark fell off in sheets. Moss curled away from the light. Then they saw it. A bridge, rope slashed, wood planked, barely hanging, suspended across a vast crevice. Beyond it, a jagged ridgeline crowned by a single immense tree, black-barked, wide-rooted, surrounded by stone. The stone tree. They hesitated only once, then crossed. The ropes moaned with each step. Boards shifted. One snapped clean beneath Heron's foot, but he caught the next with his heel and pushed forward. At the far edge, Noman turned and raised his knife. When they all had made it across the bridge, Heron gave a single nod. Together, they cut the ropes. The bridge fell into the canyon, vanishing into mist. The path behind them was gone. They turned toward the tree. It stood taller than they expected, not just wide, but vast. Its bark split in long vertical wounds. Its roots cracked through the stone like the memory of something stronger. Then, far from the ridge, a sound rose. Low, not wind, not quake, a bellow, ancient and heavy. It did not echo, it pressed. Triferus reached for his blade, but Heron raised a hand. No, he said, you go ahead. Noman frowned. What? There's something here, Heron said. Something I feel in my bones I have to face. You're not fighting that thing alone, Triferus growled. You won't help by staying here and dying, Heron replied. They stood a moment longer. The Noman nodded once. They nodded once. Besides, I have a feeling we're needed in the caverns. We'll wait for you inside. They turned toward the caverns, and Heron stayed behind. The wind circled once, then the smoke arrived, coiling from the north like steam pulled from bone. The stone tree did not speak, it opened. The bark along its lowest root line cracked, then split, not like wood but like skin, revealing a narrow path that wound downward into darkness. Noman and Triferus stepped inside. The fog did not follow. The tunnel spiraled tightly, then diverged. Two paths, one lightless, one glowing faintly blue. They separated without a word, not by decision, by necessity. Triferus emerged into light. He stood in a house he had never seen, but knew by heart. His name was on the threshold. His child's laugh echoed from the next room. The floor was stone and warm, and the windows shuddered softly in the wind. Outside, a storm brewed. His wife stood in the kitchen, her back to him, humming the same lullaby his mother once sang. The child ran into the room. Come see, father, the rain's coming. Triferus froze. The storm slammed into the window, not once, but all at once. Glass shattered. The roof snapped. A scream. He tried to reach the child, but the wind twisted around his arms like ropes. Rain filled his lungs. Flame licked the beams. His wife turned, and her face was ash. He screamed, then stopped. He looked down at his child, still alive, still reaching. He let go, not of the child, of fear. Even if I lose you, he whispered, I choose you. The room collapsed, and in the ashes a sword stood upright, smooth, silver-veined, burning faintly along the spine. He took it. Noman descended. Noman descended in silence. The walls around him showed no images, just his own shadow stretched longer than it should be. At the base of the tunnel, a single room, stone altar, 3 bodies bound before it, a child, a brother, a friend. Behind the altar, a mirror. In the mirror himself, cloaked in fire, eyes hollow, hands blood-stained. A voice from the dark, take the knife, save them, but you must become what you once destroyed. The knife appeared in his hand, he did not know how. He stepped toward the altar. Each step steadier than the last. He raised the blade and stopped, not out of fear, out of clarity. I will not become a monster, he said, even to defeat one. He placed the blade on the stone gently. The image shattered. From the ruins of the mirror rose a spear, smooth, seamless, darker than iron, but light in his hand. Sicarel, true, brass, and gold at the same time. Above, Heron fought. He had thrown every spear that lay near the caverns. The pale dragon which approached him did not bleed, it did not burn, it only breathed thick smoke that screamed in the bones and unmade stone where it landed. Heron's shield was cracked, his blade broken. His newly acquired blade broken. The beast charged, he braced, and was thrown. deep into a smaller cavern. His shield fell away. His pack spilled. His vision swam. Then a skeleton, cradling a spear. A voice, not spoken but carved into the rock around him. Huron hereward, you have faced your greatest fear. Pick up the spear and toss. He reached for the shaft. One pack of black powder remained in his pack from earlier. He tied it to the shaft of the spear, set the fuse, stood. The dragon roared. He hurled the weapon into the smoke. It struck. He turned and sprinted deeper into the cave, a muted blast, a falling roar, then silence. At the mouth of the cave, the three emerged, quiet, alive. Triferus carried the sword, the arbiter. Noman bore his Sicarel spear. Huron walked last, bruised, silent, teeth bloodied, shield scorched beyond repair. No one spoke. They did not need to. The tree did not close behind them. It only stood, watching, as if it now remembered who they were. End of chapter 7. Chapter 8, The Voice of the Shadow. The wind changed the moment they stepped off the bridge. No storm, no scent, just a shift. Too clean, too sudden. The stone tree loomed behind them, silent as ever. The bridge, which they used to pass the cavern, the canyon across, on the other side of the tree, swayed gently in its wake, ropes creaking under their own memory. Huron checked the compass. It spun, not wildly, just enough to suggest uncertainty. Then it stopped, pointed backward the way they came. Noman frowned. That's not possible. Triferus turned to look. Did we miss something? No, Huron said. We crossed it. He tapped the compass again. It didn't budge. Then came the first snap. A rope leaped behind them, left anchor, then right. Not the natural fray of weather or time, but the clean pull of force. They turned. The bridge was falling. One rope recoiled into the canyon. The other cracked upward before giving away entirely. The planks dropped in folds, sucked down into the mist. No way back. Two beasts stood at the far end, motionless, clawed, silent. Their arms were still raised from the cut. The fog thickened behind them, not from below, from within. It poured across the stones like breath given shape. Shapes moved inside it, long-limbed, faceless, synchronized. Then a figure stepped into view in front of them. The compass followed, pointed at the figure. Not beast, not smoke, but man. Tall, straight-backed, hands behind his back like a noble inspecting his own defeat. No flames, no scars, no mutations. He looked like something from memory. Clean, cold, measured. The fog pulled away from him, not touching his boots. The compass in Huron's hands began to spin again, harder now. The needle rattled, dragging across the inner rim like it was trying to dig through the casing. The man smiled. Noman stepped forward quietly. What is that? Yeah, Heron said. Triferus reached for the arbiter. The figure stopped 10 paces from the first stones and let his voice reach them like something overheard from another life. I had wondered what shape the old man would choose for his final bet. His tone was gentle, almost amused. He tilted his head slightly. And this is what he sends. The man who stepped forward was no king, no tyrant, no monster. He looked like something drawn from an old philosophy, precise in bearing, calm in contempt. His dark hair was pulled back, tunic uncreased, boots clean despite the ash. Behind him, the fog pulsed, not alive, not dead, but obedient. He stood still for a time, studying them. Then he spoke, not loud, not dramatic, just certain. I watched you stumble across this world like all the others, brave, broken, noble in the way that wounds always are. He paced a slow semicircle. I've seen this game before. The fire bearers, the chosen, the desperate. They all speak of light, of redemption, of faith. He stopped. Do you know what I learned while the old man exiled me to the ash? No one answered, not even the wind. Overis raised a single hand and gestured to the world behind him. I watched every century unfold. I watched the strong become cruel, the kind become exhausted. I watched orphans grow hungry, while men, supposing themselves gods, made plans. His voice sharpened, not in pitch, but in intention. I listened, I waited, I saw 1,000 prayers end in silence. He stepped closer. I found the question. What could godhood offer that justifies the suffering of even one child? What dream, what kingdom, what eternal good makes that agony worthwhile? He smiled, small, sharp. None. Not one. Not even anything from the one. Heron gripped the edge of his shield. Noman's eyes narrowed. Triferus' thumb hovered near the guard of the arbiter. Overis turned his gaze from them, not in fear, but dismissal. The old man, the pest that he's been recently, thinks this is about winning. It never was. Fool that I was to once have thought so. This isn't a war. It's a correction. I will end the cycle. No more tyrants, no more saviors, no more children born into pain, just to fuel some plan. He looked back at them. You, however, have a choice. Kneel now, and I will make it painless. Or fight, and I will make it quick. No one moved, not even the wind. Overis raised an eyebrow. Nothing to say, not even a question. Noman moved first, not towards Overis, but with his arm. The spear came from low at the hip, a flick more than a throw. It spun straight for Overis' head. He didn't flinch, he simply raised one hand and struck it from the air with his palm. The spear tumbled end over end, clattering at the edge of the ridge. Then Heron charged. Heron didn't shout. He just lowered his stance, tucked his shoulder behind the shield, and ran straight at Overis. The ridge trembled underfoot. Triferus moved to follow, the arbiter drawn low, humming. Noman picked up a second spear and advanced behind them. Overis didn't move, not until Heron was 5 strides away. Then a blur, a kick, not high, not dramatic, just efficient. It caught Heron's shield dead center. The force traveled through bronze, arm, spine, and launched Heron backward like a loosed arrow. He slammed into the ridge stones and slid until he hit one of the standing roots with a thud. He didn't rise. Triferus came next. No scream, no flourish, just a swing, upward and hard. Overis dodged it. The arbiter cracked stone where it missed, but Triferus was already moving again. A second cut, short, fast, aimed at the ribs. This one landed. A shallow line opened at Overis' side. He looked down on it, watched it close, then drove his fist upward into Triferus' chest. A clean uppercut. Triferus' body lifted off the ground. Before he could fall, Overis stepped into him and turned the blow into a kick. Triferus went flying, spinning midair, landing flat on his back beside Heron. Noman raised his spear and prepared to charge, but Overis was already drawing a sword. No chant, no glow, it simply appeared. Blue flame slid up the blade from nothing. Then armor, ash black, veined with pale light, formed around his chest, shoulders, arms, no helmet. He wanted them to see his face. He lowered the blade. The flame did not waver. This is idiotic, he said. Tell me, when one sees some stray animal helplessly trudging along, wounded in agony, do they not see it merciful to end its terrible existence? Why then is it different from man? Is he not the most wounded of animals? Is he not cursed with the suffering that becomes inherent in his conscious existence? Does he not suffer more than anything he ever knew? If you join me, let me. I will make a world where no one else will ever have to suffer. No one else will have to feel pain. Don't make me have to cleave you. Accept the painless sleep of the fog. Stay down. Triferus coughed once, then pushed himself to a knee. Heron stirred beside him, one gauntlet twitching. Noman stood his ground, breathing hard, spear still held low. Overis watched them in silence, his blade aglow with steady blue fire. His armor glinted like bone breath. Ice. No mockery now, only inevitability. Triferus exhaled once, then hurled the arbiter into the sky. The blade spun once, twice, end over end, trailing faint sparks. The compass in Heron's satchel shattered with a sharp crystalline snap. The glass on Heron's compass shattered with a sharp crystalline snap. Light cracked from the clouds, first as a seam, then a column. The fog recoiled, hissing. Beasts shrieked or tried to. Their sound was ripped away by the roar of wind. The arbiter froze mid-air. Light struck it like a thrown hammer, and through that light he came. Sigil descended without wings, just present. Robes torn, hair sizzled by ash, staff of pure light, flowing faintly in his right hand. His feet didn't touch the ground. The beast lunged toward him, 2, then 5, then more. He raised one hand, a pulse. Radiance exploded outward, not heat, not fire, but memory. The beast turned to dust mid-charge. The light settled. Sigil stepped forward. "Hello, Overis," he said. Overis' mouth twitched the ghost of a grin. "You're late, old man." Sigil nodded once. "You're worse." Overis raised his blade. Flame burst forward. Sigil answered with wind. The storm began again. Overis struck first, not with blade, but with fire. He swung the sword low, and blue flame poured from it like a second spine, twisting, spitting, alive. The heat was strong, cold at its edge, searing at its center. It licked the stone as it moved, carving symbols that hurt to read. The ridge darkened and lit again in a burnished glow. Sigil didn't flinch. He lifted his staff slowly, not as shield, but as truth. Wind rose, not gale, not storm, something older. It twisted around him, forming a sphere of dense air, warm and layered. The kind of wind that remembered breath, that held the scent of childhood fields and deathbeds alike. The fire struck the dome and rose upward in a spiral, unable to pass. It flickered once, then failed. Overis didn't pause. With a flick of the wrist, he summoned the claws of the fallen beast, dozens of them, jagged and black, still wet with the memory of blood. They lifted from the ground and snapped into formation, hovering like the drawn arrows of a ghost battalion. Then they launched. Sigil's eyes didn't move. The wind around him thickened. The claws hit, or tried to. Each one dissolved into powder before it touched the shield. They fell in clouds, harmless, scentless, stripped of intent, ash on the wind, then silence. Overis' face twitched, not in rage, but in calculation. He raised his left hand, the sword still burning in his right, and clenched the air. The sky dimmed, lightning bent, then broke. Dark lightning split the ridge, a jagged streak of void that tore through color and cast black shadows where none should be. It moved not with crackle, but with silence that sucked in the world around it. The heroes shielded their eyes. Sigil stepped forward and caught it. The lightning wrapped around his staff like ink across a river's surface, curling, dragging, resisting. He didn't fight it. He held it still, then turned the staff upward and released. The blast was not loud, but it was complete. A bloom of white light, pure, harmonic, pulsed outward in every direction. The ground quaked. The fog turned clear. For just a moment, the sky opened. Overis stood at the epicenter. His sword cracked, then split down the length. The flames winked out. His armor followed, spidering with fractures, crumbling at the chest, the shoulders, the gauntlets. He dropped to one knee, gasping. Smoke rose from the seams in his armor, not like fire, but like a soul trying to leave a broken cage. His hands twitched, once, twice, but no weapon came. He looked up. Sigil walked toward him. No shield now, no wind, only the staff, dimmed, and a face worn by many years. He knelt, not to show weakness, but to listen. Overis' body flickered. The skin on his cheek had gone translucent. The fog no longer obeyed him. His voice, when it came, was barely a thread. "Goodbye, my father." Sigil reached forward and placed one hand on Overis' shoulder. "Goodbye, once more," he said, "my wayward son." And the shadow of Tenebral dissolved like embered ash. The ridge was still. No fog, no flame, only wind. It rustled through broken branches and the gaps in shattered stone. Not like storm or warning, but breath. The kind that follows a held note. The kind that means it is done. Heron stood slowly, one arm clutching his ribs. Noman helped Triferus to his feet. They said nothing. No one moved toward the spot where Overis had fallen. There was no body, no ash, just a patch of darkened stone that had never known blood. Sigil sat on a nearby log. He looked older now, not in years, but in presence.
as if the air around him understood that he would not remain long. His staff had dimmed. Only the faintest glow lingered at its core. Triferus stepped forward. Sigil gestured toward the Arbiter, now lodged upright where it had landed, its metal quiet but warm. "Place it before me," Sigil said. Triferus obeyed, planting the blade deep into the soil. It hummed once, softly, like something remembering its name. Sigil placed his hand atop its pommel. He looked to each of them in turn. "You were not sent," he said. "You chose. Remember that." They nodded, but still said nothing. There was a light forming around him now, not radiant, but soft, the way candlelight clings to the edges of a sleeping room. "I will not give you a prophecy," Sigil said. "Only thanks." The sun had begun to set. The shadow of the stone tree reached their feet. Sigil closed his eyes, and his body, slowly, gently, began to unravel into golden dust. First the shoulders, then the hands, then the staff, which collapsed into ash and light. The dust rose, not fast, not high, just enough to drift toward the Arbiter and settle across the blade. A final breath, a final light, then nothing. No one moved. Then Heron picked up the compass from the stones nearby. Shattered, yes, but still faintly humming. Its needle twitched, then turned west. End of chapter 8. Chapter 9. The Gate of Death. They walked west. No more sigil. No more stars. Just windless air and ground that cracked without echo. The wind had stopped rotating, not in physics, but in feeling. Even breath seemed to fall straight down, no sky, just the suggestion of one. Triferus' boots had begun to bleed through at the soles. Noman limped, his side still bound. Heron carried nothing now, but the spear at his back and his silence. Their canteens had long since emptied, even thirst had gone quiet. The land did not rot. It unmade. Trees stood mid-bloom, but the petals were paper-thin and hollow inside. Grass grew in tangled spirals, some floating an inch above the ground. Occasionally the path buckled under them, not from quake, but from logic failing to hold its shape. They said little, not because there was nothing to say, but because words needed footing, and this place had none. It was Triferus who broke first. He looked up. He did not know why, just a flick of the eye, some ancient habit seeking sun or sky. What he saw wasn't sky. It wasn't black, it wasn't anything. It was the kind of absence that leaked inward, too big for thought, too close for reason. The curve of it folded and twisted, breaking shape in ways no muscle or memory could follow. Triferus staggered, gripped his temples, his knees hit dirt, then he turned and vomited into the dust. Heron helped him up without speaking. Noman watched the sky, but didn't look at it deeply. They walked on, but by instinct, not direction. By defiance, not aim. There were no birds, no beasts, only the sound of 3 sets of feet crackling through a world that had forgotten what sound was. The ridge rose without slope. One moment they were walking flat, the next their feet were higher than the sky, or what remained of it. Distance no longer followed reason. Horizon bled into shape like spilled ink, and just ahead, stone. It wasn't carved. It had always just been there. A gate, massive and wordless, towered from the black hill before them. No seam, no joints, just 2 vertical slabs that leaned slightly inward like the beginnings of an answer. Each was etched with deep spiraling groves, not symbols, not art, more like fossilized movement. To either side, towers, no flags, no guards, no doors. The trio stopped 10 paces from the gate. It hummed faintly, not in the air, but in the ribs, a sound the body heard before the ears could register. Heron tilted his head. Whatever it is, it knows we're here. Noman shifted his grip on his spear, but said nothing. Triferus touched the pommel of his sheath, then let go. The ground beneath them was warm, Not comforting, just inhabited. With a groan like the breath of stone undersea, the gate began to part. No summons, no flare, just pressure, releasing. 2 slabs drew inward a few feet, a few paces, then stopped. A space opened between them. Tall, lightless, waiting. No sound came from the other side. Only air, old, dry, like parchment sealed for too long. Heron stepped forward first. Noman followed. Triferus looked back once, not toward the trail, but toward the edge of the world, and then entered behind them. The gate did not close. It did not need to. The walls curved inward, not architecturally, but with a kind of gravity, like thought bending around a secret. They followed the passage in silence. No torches lined walls, no runes, only stone, darker than night and smoother than bone. Every footfall echoed differently. Triferus thought they were alone. Then he heard it. Not a sound of pressure ahead, then footsteps. They did not clank, they did not stomp. They arrived with a kind of dreadful rhythm, as if space was making way for something too large to be refused. From the far end of the corridor, a shape emerged. First, the horns. 4 of them curved like blades of dust. Then the armor, black, seamless, veined with something that pulsed like molten stone. The figure stood at least twice as tall as Heron. No cape, no crest, no weapon drawn, just presence. At the center of its faceplate, 4 eye holes, empty. Behind them, nothing. No, not darkness, not shadow, nothing. The figure did not speak. It did not brandish. It simply walked forward and stopped. A breath passed, maybe 2. Then Heron drew his spear. Triferus reached for the arbiter. Noman rolled his shoulders once, readying his footing. None of them spoke. The gate had opened. The silence had answered, and now the end stood waiting. Noman moved first. No single signal, just instinct. Like the body knew it would never get a second chance. He lunged left, spear low, driving space toward this avatar of Tenebral, beneath Tenebral's arm. Heron surged in front, from the right, faster than expected, shield raised, rear spear tucked behind. Triferus came straight down the middle, all 3 of them with deadly intent. Triferus with arbiter burning along its spine. For a moment, just one, it looked like strategy. Then this form of Tenebral moved. He caught Noman's spear with one hand, not even by the shaft, but by the blade. The metal didn't resist, it simply stopped. Noman's body snapped to a halt mid-step. The force of his charge turned against him. Tenebral's other arm lashed out, flat palm. Heron was hit square in the chest. He didn't stumble, he flew. Shield cracked, helmet gone. He skidded across the stone like something discarded. Triferus swung with the arbiter down hard, aimed for the neck joint. Tenebral turned and blocked it with his forearm. The sword rebounded. Triferus struck again, a follow-up slash aimed at the knee. It landed, the armor cracked, and then came the lightning. It wasn't called, it was exhaled from Tenebral's core. A single pulse of dark lightning bursted forward. It struck Triferus square in the chest. He didn't scream, he just dropped backward, heavy, the arbiter skidding from his hand and chipped at the sides. He landed beside Noman, who was gasping now, ribs caved in, blood at the lips. Tenebral turned toward them. No voice, no advance, just stillness. Triferus reached for his sheath, empty. The arbiter was gone. His eyes widened. He looked up slowly, painfully, and saw Heron standing, the arbiter in his hands. Heron stood still. His right arm hung limp. Blood stained the edge of his jaw. His shield was gone. The left side of his cuirass had split at the seam, but the arbiter was in his hands, and it burned. Not bright, not yet, just a low pulse like a drumbeat heard through stone. Tenebral turned to face him. No words, no gesture of challenge. Only that mask, 4 horns, 4 eye holes in the void behind them. Heron stepped forward, each motion deliberate, each footfall steady, despite the wounds. The arbiter began to glow brighter with every pace, not with flame, but with memory. Etchings along the blade shimmered gold and white, then something unnameable. Triferus coughed blood, trying to speak. Noman reached for his spear, but his hand barely twitched. Neither of them could rise, they could only watch. Tenebral raised one gauntlet. A low hum began like storm wind in a sealed tomb. Dark energy pooled as pond, then erupted a bolt of pure oblivion, darker than lightless night, shot toward Heron. He didn't raise the sword, he walked through it. The energy passed around him, not deflected, not blocked. It parted as if the light in his chest refused to acknowledge it. One step more, then another, then a final strike. He drove the Arbiter forward, not overhead, not in range, just a clean thrust into the heart of Tenebral's armor. It struck and held. Tenebral staggered once, then froze. No scream, no collapse, only stillness. Heron exhaled, turned back to them, and smiled, faintly, tiredly, like someone who had finally remembered where he was meant to go. Heron's hands didn't tremble, even as the Arbiter remained lodged in Tenebral's chest. The light along the blade didn't fade, it deepened, it softened, it became still. Tenebral did not fall, his armor did not shatter, but behind the mask the void began to unmake itself, slowly, inwardly, as though the space it had occupied no longer permitted its presence. The world buckled and steadied, like something being let go. Heron stepped back once. The Arbiter burned in his grip, but his body had begun to change, not visibly, not at first, but perceptibly. The edges of his outline flickered. His feet no longer echoed. His form no longer cast shadow. Noman stirred, eyes wide. He tried to rise, failed. Triferus gritted his teeth, crawling to his knees. Huron looked at them both and smiled. "You'll all be all right," he said. Then he turned. The Arbiter flared once, bright, full, golden, and Huron walked forward toward the hollowed armor of Tenebral, into the wound in the world where all gods fall. There was no scream, there was no collapse, only a deep, resonant pulse, like the strike of a bell with a cathedral too vast to name. The world flexed outward, and for a breathless moment all was still. Then the wind came, clean, strange, and westbound. Triferus crawled to where Heron had disappeared. The glass at the crater's center was warm beneath his fingers. It pulsed once, not from heat, from memory. "He's still in there," Noman whispered. Triferus nodded. Not because he fully understood, but because it was the only thing that made sense. They sat side by side as the ruined sky began to mend, slowly, imperfectly. The edges of clouds stitched themselves together like threads rewoven after fire. Light crept back into the air. The wind carried no scent of ash, and far beyond what could be seen, somewhere past name and sound, came the faint ring of metal striking metal. Once, then again, he was still fighting. He was still holding the dark at bay, and as long as he did, the world would endure. End of Chapter 9 of Book 5 of Volume 1. End.